Raising the Conversation, Season 3, Tomorrow's Church. A podcast by the MacRae Centre for Faith and Culture at Acadia Divinity College, with your host Joel Murphy, facilitator of trend research and analysis here at the MacRae Centre.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us again. I'm very excited and pleased to be able to be joined today by Reverend Dr. Steve McMullin, who most folks will know if you're located on the Atlantic Canada space or East Coast. Steve he's now retired. He was previously the professor of Sheldon, I don't even know how to say it, the chair of evangelism and mission, the Sheldon Marjorie Fountain Chair. Is that correct, Steve? Saying that right?
That's right, yes.
And so he's teaching in the areas of evangelism and mission. He was also the academic dean for a number of years. He's a sociologist, which I find quite exciting. And so he's grounded he was also a pastor. So he has a good balance between academic rigor as well as pastoral care. And he is now actually holds the title Professor Emeritus. I'm very glad to be able to discuss and have a conversation with you today, Steve, particularly around the conversation of immigration and increased diversity within our churches. Obviously, the East Coast, we're a little bit behind the rest of Canada, but I know that you've been thinking and doing a lot of research as well as just talking to local pastors about this. And so, welcome. And the first question I had for you was, why is this established trend of immigration and increased diversity within Canada so important for church leaders to consider?
Well, thanks, Joel. It's good to have a chance to talk about these things. I think one of the reasons we need to consider this is because I think a lot of churches are a little slow to realize how quickly immigration has been changing in Canada. I mean, really for, more than 100 years, immigration in Canada was at lower levels. So I think between the Second World War and around 1990, 100 and some thousand immigrants coming into Canada, and the vast majority of those people from Europe and the United States. So that was typical of my growing up years, when I didn't really know many people who were immigrants, except for people from the UK and maybe the US. And that's changed dramatically. And as you've said, some of the larger centers in Canada, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Edmonton, Calgary, have seen immigration for some time. And here in Atlantic Canada, we've not only been seeing it suddenly, but we've been catching up because the rate now into Atlantic Canada has been faster than the rate into other parts of Canada over the last few years. So from 100 and some thousand immigrants a year up to 1990, suddenly we went up to 200 and some thousand, and a change where people from other parts of the world were coming to Canada. And then into, around, I think, 2015, we went over 300,000. 2021, I think we went over 400,000. Next year, the government says we're going to go over 500,000 people coming. This is a huge change. So as a pastor, my first two churches, immigrants on one hand, I could count. Coming to Main Street Baptist Church in St. John in 1997, we began to see a good number of Mandarin-speaking people from mainland China kind of be part of our congregation, and so in a sense we became a cross-cultural congregation. We had two cultures in our congregation, and now I look at our congregation in 2024, still same church, but now called Rivercross Church. And on any Sunday, we would have more than 30 different cultures represented, hundreds of people. This is a huge change for us, and it affects every aspect of the life of our church. It affects, who's in leadership. Suddenly we need to make sure that we have people from Asia, from Africa, from South America who are involved in key leadership areas like our governing boards, for example. In terms of just visibility on Sunday, that as people come, there are people in the worship team. Again, the worship teams represent different cultures. people who are involved in various areas of ministry, children's ministry and youth ministry. We actually have, I believe, more children of immigrants in our children's ministries, and we have a lot of kids in our children's ministry, but the majority of them are children of immigrants compared to children of Canadian-born parents. Youth ministry, I think, is about half and half, probably. So again, thinking through leadership for those groups and thinking through how do we both be effective in nurturing Christians some of whom have a very traditional Canadian Christian church background, and other people who come from a very different cultural understanding of the Christian church, where things are done differently with different priorities and emphases. So we have that to think about, while at the same time, looking around our city, how do we be a witness to people, to all people, regardless of their cultural background? Because we live in a city where, and this will be true throughout Atlantic Canada, and beyond, where people are from various cultural backgrounds. One of the neat things to me was talking with a person back a few months ago from a small rural community in Atlantic Canada, and telling me, the church isn't doing well. It's been declining for years, and, our community's dying. And I said, well, with all the immigrations taking place, most places the population is growing. I said, what about your? Oh shit, I don't think the population is growing here. And I said, well, do you have any immigrants in your community? No, we wouldn't have any immigrants. I said, well, you're a coastal community. I said, so are there no people working in the fishery or? Well, yeah, she says, those people, but she says, they're not part of the community, which suddenly struck me. How many people in communities, perhaps even rural communities, have people who are coming to Canada from other cultures, and they just haven't realized they're there? I mean, I'm certainly sure that's true in cities where there are many people who just don't realize the extent of the change that's taken place. And I guess the last thing I'll say with that question is, if we think there's been a lot of change in the last few years, hang on, because the rate of immigration has continued to increase. So over the next 10 years, my expectation is, unless there's some drastic change in what's happening in our world, the rate of immigration will be higher than it's been in the last 10 years. So it's really important, I believe, that pastors and church leaders and congregations realize they need to be prepared if they're serious about ministry in the name of Jesus Christ to everyone, if they're serious about the gospel, the good news of Jesus for people of all cultural backgrounds. We need to be recognizing how in our churches and in our leadership, we need to be able to cross cultural barriers.
Yeah, no, I think that's obviously like you've, and we've had conversations about this. Like it hits every different, like there's so many different church life and church practices pieces that it's so relevant to and has influence and will shape it in the future as we think about it. And obviously in this conversation, being like two individuals who have been born and raised in Canada, like in these type of conversations, like we need to have the voice of immigrant pastors and individuals who are new to Canada and about their experience. Because I think that it leads into this next question around interculturality. Like, how do we engage in meaningful conversations? We need to be able to have the conversations from the individual who says, oh, there's nobody else in this community, but then also have conversations and understand the perspective of individuals who are like, no, we're here and we're active and we have a vibrant faith. What does that then mean for the local church and the implications of that? So I just want to recognize that also and say, like, yeah, we need to have increased voices around this topic from not just the Canadian, the individual born in Canada's perspective, but also those coming and working together. And so maybe that leads into this question around, like, I know you're a huge champion of the term interculturality. And so could you explain a little bit of what that means and why that specific term is so important in the work you're doing?
Yes, well, it really is important. And what you've just talked about is one of the reasons why it's so important. And that is that sometimes from our Canadian cultural perspective, we see this as sort of two things: Canadian culture and others. And actually, if you go back, even in the literature and in ways in which churches maybe tried to think about these issues until not long ago, the term cross-cultural is what would have been used, because typically in Canada, we weren't actually thinking about people of other cultures very much. We were thinking about training missionaries to go to another part of the world, or maybe even having a mission team, a short-term mission team from our church, from our culture, going to another part of the world. And so we would want them to learn about another culture.
Mm.
That's not the Canada that we're living in anymore. So it's not just about teaching Canadians how to cross a culture. It's now about, well, several things. It's about teaching Canadians how to relate well to people of many cultures, regardless of what their culture is. So in other words, we're not just thinking about how do I learn about what people from Bolivia are like before I go on a mission trip there. It's about learning that there are cultural patterns that different parts of the world may have about family life, about scheduling, about things that they prioritize in their lives, and becoming competent in understanding some of these cultural differences so that we don't have to learn about the cultures of 30 different countries when people from 30 countries start coming to our church. Instead, we learn that there are some cultural principles that would be helpful so that we can relate to people of a variety of cultures. But as important as that is, I don't think that's even as important as the fact that we need to realize that when people from 30 different cultures or two different cultures or however many cultures come here and come to our church, they need to learn how to relate to one another. It's not as if they all need to learn to relate in the same ways to Canadians. They need to learn to relate to one another. So again, in our congregation, where we have people from South America, from places like Bolivia or Brazil or Ecuador or Colombia, where we have people from those countries in our congregation, they need to learn to relate to each other, as well as relating to people from various countries in Africa and in Asia and strange people like us in Canada. So intercultural competency is about helping everyone, regardless of of their background, to learn to relate across these cultural boundaries or cultural characteristics that tend to make us not understand one another well and not incorporate others well. We want people to be able to come to our congregations without feeling that they don't fit somehow. If people come and they say, I think a lot of congregations want to be welcoming, and that's good. People come and we welcome them. We're glad to see them there, but they just feel like outsiders. Know how? They know they're always guests.
Huh.
That's what we want to get past, and that's what intercultural competency is about. It's about helping people to truly become incorporated fully into the life of a congregation, so that everyone knows that they really are part of the church, that they're not second class, they're not guests, that we are all part of this group. Let me just say one other thing that I think relates to this, and that is, I always have one other thing. To realize that, and I think a lot of Canadian Christians do not realize this, about 40% of all of the immigrants coming to Canada are already Christians. Like when they respond about their own religious background, about 40% of all immigrants say that they are Christian. And then when immigrants are surveyed in comparison with Canadian Christians, immigrant Christians are more devout in things like church attendance, prayer, scripture reading. So we have this group of people from around the world coming to Canada who are actually more devout in their practice of the Christian faith. And sometimes we treat them as if they have to learn all the things that we assume they don't know. When in fact, part of intercultural competency is realizing they can teach us some things. And so instead of doing all of the talking, we need to start doing some listening to people from other cultures. The second largest group of people in terms of their religious affiliation, the second largest group coming to Canada is people who say they are secular or atheist, which then means this talks to our mission as a church. Now, the truth is, we are living in a secular culture to begin with, so we should be working hard on figuring out how to be more effective in sharing the gospel with secular, lifelong Canadians. But the fact is, there are a lot of people coming from other parts of the world who need to hear the good news of Jesus. And oftentimes, that will happen best as they hear it from other people from their part of the world who are incorporated into our church. So if we want to be effective in reaching people of all cultures, it's helpful when we are a church comprised of people of all cultures so that we can witness to a wide variety of people.
I love that. And I think the for me, the nugget in that is obviously elevating and understanding like the importance of this and the importance of how does a church consider to be moved towards it being an intercultural church, to be aware and recognize that this is happening in our society. But I think the language that you use around an openness, I think it speaks, I've heard the term like cultural humility, and we've talked about that in terms of how do we, as we look towards to learn from others, like how do we approach it with humility so that we don't actually just assume what I know is best or whatever, right? To be able to learn and like you said, we can learn things from people coming into our spaces. And I think there's lots of like reward and gifts that can come when you're in an intercultural space, coming from learning how to worship from different cultures and different. The efficacy of the Holy Spirit and the value of the Holy Spirit is different in a lot of spaces, particularly in the Baptist context. I think there's, as you said, there's a humility that if we're able to acknowledge this, be able to be then faithful, that there's a lot of gifts that can come from this space of learning more and more what it means to be intercultural.
Yes, and being out intercultural, I mean, it's exciting to me because we do need to learn, we do need to listen, but once again, it's not just us. People who are moving here need to learn and need to listen. So it's not as if the Canadian church has nothing to offer and we need to allow these other people to offer things to us. It's that we are all part of the church of Jesus Christ. And we, in our Canadian understanding and heritage, have a great deal that we can share with others. But we need to listen also. So people who are moving here from other parts of the world, oftentimes they're very interested in hearing from us. And that's a good thing. We do have gifts, but so do others. And so it's learning to allow one another to listen. So that, again, I was going to say it's a two-way street. It's probably a 50 or 60-way street. But we need to be learning from one another.
Oh, I love that. And again, like, and we'll conclude here with the final question, but I think it's just like you're illuminating and illustrating the complexity. It's a complex season that the Canadian church is in currently. And as we think about the future, it's increasingly complex as we think about the changes not only within the church, but within the Canadian society as a whole. But I think, like you said, there's opportunities and there's the benefits and hope within that. And that, again, translates into this final question, which we try to end all these conversations on. But when thinking about the future church, where do you find hope as you think about whether in the context of increased immigration and diversity within context, or just more broadly about the future church? Where are you finding hope?
I think where I'm finding hope right now is that there are a lot of people who are asking questions about this. And that's really encouraging to me. I wish they had been asking these questions 10 years ago, or at least 5 years ago. So I think we're a little late to the game,
Hmm.
but it's remarkable to me the extent to which this question is on the front burner in many places in the Christian church in Canada right now. And so that gives me hope. I think there are a lot of people that don't know what to do. They don't know how to do this, but they know they need to do it and they need to find out how. And so that gives me hope that um, that there's already a lot of thinking about the fact that church is not going to be the same as it's been, and that part of the way forward is for us to learn how to work well together interculturally. Um, Again, that affects so many aspects of church life. I look at children's and youth ministries that are doing this well. And I just think this is not just about children's and youth ministry. This is about the future of the church. This is how we are raising up a generation to think interculturally about how we do church. Um, I guess um, I'm pleased that there are some churches that I think are showing the way. So I think that's a good thing too, that it's not as if we are starting from scratch. There are congregations that, and probably not knowing what to do themselves, but have learned by trial and error some ways to do this. And so there are leaders and congregations that can give some guidance that I think will be helpful for the future. Um, I'm excited that Acadia Divinity College sees this as a priority because I think that seminary is an appropriate place. We need to be teaching our graduates the skills and the understandings that they will need, and we need. I think it's an opportunity for us as a seminary to provide resources to congregations too. So those are all good things. I guess the last thing I'll say is it isn't all going well
Mm.
in the sense that I think in Canada, we've made some decisions that weren't the best. And I've heard some of these stories. They're sort of humorous when I hear them, and yet they're not humorous because they're people. People who've told me about really how they've not been welcomed well. When they came as people of other cultures to Canada, some of the things that I'll just say, I hope well-meaning Canadian churches did that really were not good.
Mm.
Um, I continue. One of my big concerns is that we have a tendency to silo people by culture. This will be a congregation for this type of people, and we'll have another congregation for that ethnicity, and so on. And I think that we are recognizing, I think Canadian Christians are recognizing that's not the way forward. It may have been a stopgap measure when we didn't know what to do, but I think there's a greater openness now that in the future we'll seek to be truly intercultural congregations. So I do think there's hope.
Mm. I appreciate that. Well, and I think I like your comment about like there's things happening, and as we wrap up, like I think your insights and the way that you've been thinking about this and the people you've been talking to, I think is so helpful for church leaders to think about and consider. And so I hope that in the listening, it just begins to help maybe settle people a little bit in terms of like, I don't know what to do. So settling of like, take a breath, and then
Right.
that there are actions to be able to move forward. And I think like your comment about there's spaces that things have not been done well. Like, I think that's a part of recognizing, like,
Right.
I remember when I was living in a house with individuals from different cultural backgrounds, and I put my foot in my mouth several times. and luckily they were gracious towards me in terms of offering forgiveness and helping me learn and understand. But that's, I think, the part of it in terms of being anything around intercultural humility or working or learning from other cultures. It's grounded in relationships. So that's something we can all do. We can move towards others in a posture of friendship and a desire to know who they are, and that is the starting place for any type of positive intercultural experience. So I think thank you so much for your insights and for your perspective, and I think this hopefully just can be the catalyst for a lot of conversations as we continue to move forward and wrestle with this really important trend and implication for the future. Thanks, Steve.
Very good.